On the 13th of November, 1943, aboard the USS Essex in the Philippine Sea, at 3:47 in the morning, aviation machinist's mate second class James Sweat observes yet another EF-6EF Hellcat tumbling off the carrier's deck into the dark Pacific Ocean below. This marks the third pilot they've lost this week alone, not from battles with Japanese Zeros or from enemy anti-aircraft rounds, but from their very own fuel tanks bursting into flames during nighttime landings on the carrier. The numbers tell a devastating story. Since October, Task Force 38 has seen 47 Hellcat pilots perish due to these fuel vapor blasts while trying to recover on the ship. Those self-sealing fuel tanks, meant to shield pilots from hostile fire, are turning out to be the thing that's dooming them instead. Each rough touchdown, every snag of the arresting hook, sends a powerful jolt rippling through the fuel setup. The vapors catch fire, and suddenly the cockpit turns into a blazing furnace before the pilot even has a chance to unbuckle their straps. Admiral Mark Mitcher has put a complete halt to all operations after dark. Without the ability to launch fighters at night, the entire carrier group is essentially defenseless once the sun goes down. Japanese planes carrying torpedoes are taking full advantage of this weakness. Just last week, the USS Independence was hit by 2 torpedoes in a raid that struck at midnight, claiming the lives of 73 sailors. The vessel barely limped its way back to Pearl Harbor for repairs. The Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics has been tackling this issue for a full 8 months now. Their proposed fix involves beefing up the brackets that hold the tanks in place, adding springs to cushion the impacts, and tweaking the pressure release on the filler caps. But none of it is making a difference. Pilots are still losing their lives, and the fuel tanks keep detonating.
What the high-ranking officers don't realize, what no one has figured out yet, is that a 24-year-old mechanic hailing from Terre Haute, Indiana, has been running his own secret tests down in Hangar Bay 3. James Sweat didn't even finish high school. He lacks any kind of engineering credential or official education in designing fuel systems. His role is supposed to be limited to obeying commands, tightening bolts, and staying out of the bigger picture. But Sweat has been paying close attention to the probes into these crashes. He's been analyzing the scorch marks, and he's spotted something that slipped past all the experts. Something so straightforward and basic that when he eventually lays it out for the top brass, they'll suspect him of deliberate tampering. They'll warn him about facing a court-martial, claiming his concept breaks at least 3 key Navy rules and could land him 20 years behind bars at Leavenworth. In just 3 hours from this moment, Sweat is about to sneak an EF-6EF Hellcat right off the flight deck. He'll take it up on a forbidden test run smack in the middle of an active war zone, and in doing so, he'll demonstrate that the Navy's entire understanding of how to keep fuel tanks safe is completely mistaken. The EF-6EF Hellcat came into active duty back in January of 1943, bringing with it a groundbreaking assurance. It would be the pioneering carrier-based fighter able to withstand hits in battle and still get its pilots safely back. The key innovation lay in the self-sealing fuel tank. If a bullet pierced through, a unique rubber layer would close up the breach on its own. In contrast, the Japanese Zero offered no such safeguard. A single salvo from a Hellcat's weapons could ignite a Zero into a raging inferno. American flyers could endure wounds that would spell doom for their adversaries. By the summer of 1943, the Hellcat was ruling the skies over the Pacific.
The ratio of kills stood at 19-1. Aviators adored this plane. It was swift, packed with firepower, and almost unbeatable in aerial duels. The Navy put in orders for 5,000 additional units. Then the missions under cover of darkness kicked off. Landing on a carrier has always been a high-stakes gamble. Pilots describe it as a managed collision, hurling a 20,000-pound machine onto a rolling deck at 90 knots, praying the tailhook grabs one of the wires. In the light of day, they can spot the officer signaling for landing, gauge their descent path, and compensate for the ship's sway. But at night, it's like flying sightless, relying solely on a handful of faint glows and voice guidance over the radio. The initial fuel tank blast happened on the 3rd of October, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Anderson executed a flawless nighttime touchdown on the USS Lexington. His hook snagged the number 3 wire. That abrupt slowdown triggered a surge through his fuel reservoirs. The gases ignited, and Anderson was gone before the firefighting team could get to him. The Navy pinned it on the pilot's mistake. Perhaps he approached too swiftly or impacted too forcefully. They instructed everyone to ease into their descents more gently. On the 14th of October, 1943, Ensign Charles Murphy met the same fate in a matching detonation aboard the USS Bunker Hill. Murphy's entry was spot on, his speed right out of the manual. Then, on the 22nd of October, Lieutenant James Fleming on the USS Enterprise suffered the identical explosion and outcome. By the 29th of October, 2 more pilots were lost in a single evening, one on the USS Essex and another on the USS Yorktown. The Bureau of Aeronautics assembled an urgent panel to investigate. Their specialists pinpointed the cause. The snag from the arresting wire generates a kind of hydraulic pounding inside the fuel containers. The liquid fuel rushes ahead, then bounces back. This builds up a massive pressure burst that splits the self-sealing rubber barrier. Vapors leak into the open area of the tank. The tiniest spark, from built-up static, from parts scraping, or from the wiring, sets it all ablaze. The Bureau's remedy appeared reasonable. Fortify the whole setup. Install sturdier brackets to keep the tank steady. Add buffering springs to soak up the jolts, and adjust the relief valves to expel gases quicker. They upgraded 200 planes with these changes. But on the 6th of November, 1943, the very first modified craft erupted upon touching down. Lieutenant Richard Best was killed on the spot. The Admirals were in a panic. Admiral Mitcher shut down all nighttime fighter activities until further notice. Lacking aerial protection after dark left the carrier fleets exposed. Japanese subs had already claimed 2 destroyers. Torpedo-carrying planes struck freely once night fell. Reports from intelligence suggested the Japanese were gathering their sub-forces for a unified assault on the carriers under the cloak of darkness. The leading experts in fuel systems for the Navy, graduates from places like MIT and Caltech, were at a loss. They'd experimented with tougher tanks, improved venting, and impact reduction. Nothing clicked. The shared view was stark. Self-sealing fuel tanks and carrier ops at night just couldn't coexist. The Navy faced a tough choice between the two. Down in Hangar Bay 3 on the USS Essex, aviation machinist's mate second class James Sweat wasn't buying into that conclusion. He'd been observing the inquiries closely, poring over the debris, and he believed the focus was misplaced. James Sweat had grown up mending farm equipment on his family's plot in Indiana, amid the hardships of the Great Depression. He left school at 16 after his dad passed away, stepping up to provide for his mom and 3 little sisters. He landed work at an auto shop in Terre Haute, earning a local reputation as the young guy who could repair just about anything mechanical. When the attack on Pearl Harbor hit, Sweat signed up the very next day. The Navy turned him down for pilot training due to his lack of a high school degree, which barred him from officer paths. Instead, they assigned him as a mechanic. Sweat took it in stride. He thrived on tinkering with planes. The EF-6EF Hellcat represented the most intricate device he'd ever handled. 9 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, hydraulic lines, electrical networks, armaments. He devoured every handbook available and signed up for all the instruction sessions he could. In under 6 months, he could take apart and put back together a Hellcat power plant with his eyes shut. But Sweat went beyond mere mechanical tasks. He studied failures in depth. Where others saw a faulty component, Sweat discerned a trend. When the pros suggested fixes, he ran mental simulations based on his real-world observations. On the night of the 12th of November, 1943,
Sweat drew duty for examining a crash. Lieutenant William Edwards had just perished in yet another fuel tank inferno. Sweat scrutinizes the charred remains in the hangar. The tanks are split open just like the previous ones. The reinforced brackets from the Navy's latest upgrades hold firm. The cushioning springs show no harm. The pressure vents operated flawlessly. Sweat gazes at the darkened tanks for a solid 3 hours. Then it hits him. The blast started up top, not at the base. The charring indicates the flames moved downward, yet fuel weighs more than air and should settle low. If the pounding was stirring up fuel and generating risky vapors, the fire ought to originate below where the mix happens. Unless the real issue isn't with the fuel itself. Sweat snatches a light and squeezes into the twisted metal. He checks the tank's inner surfaces.
The self-sealing rubber holds up fine at the bottom, but up near the filler cap, it's ripped to shreds. Not scorched, but mechanically shredded prior to the blaze. Sweat grasps the truth. The specialists are addressing a false dilemma. The hydraulic surge isn't producing hazardous vapors by splashing around the liquid fuel. Instead, it's generating a void. As the plane jerks to a stop, the fuel lunges forward, creating an empty pocket at the rear of the tank. Since nature despises emptiness, air floods in via the filler cap to occupy it. But the flexible, self-sealing rubber, built to bend, gets pulled inward by that suction. It rips apart, and in ripping, it builds static charge. That discharge sparks the ever-present fuel vapors in a tank that's not completely full. The Navy's approaches, making tanks tougher, actually exacerbate things. More rigid tanks amplify the vacuum pull. Enhanced vents release vapors swifter, intensifying the voids. Sweat sees the cure, but he knows a guy like him, without fancy papers, won't get an audience. On the 13th of November, 1943, in Hangar Bay 3, Sweat lies awake. Visions of Lieutenant Edwards engulfed in flames haunt him. The fix seems so straightforward, so evident. Occupy the vacant areas in the fuel tank with a material that stops voids from forming. Something neutral that doesn't combust, something that swells and shrinks along with the fuel amount. Foam rubber fits the bill. Lining the tank's interior with open-cell foam rubber would let it absorb fuel like a sponge when topped off. As fuel depletes in flight, the foam doles it out steadily. Crucially, the foam occupies the empty spots. No voids equal no suction. No suction means no shredding of the sealing layer. No shredding means no static ignition. The foam might tack on about 5 pounds per tank. It wouldn't hinder how the plane flies. No big structural overhauls needed. You could install it in 60 minutes flat.
Sweat tracks down Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres in the repair office. Torres has 15 years under his belt in naval aviation and values Sweat's gut feelings. Chief, I need around 6 cubic feet of foam rubber and access to a Hellcat's fuel setup, Sweat says. Torres eyes him. What's this for? I figured out the tank explosions and how to stop them. The Bureau of Aeronautics has 50 engineers on it, but they're barking up the wrong tree. Torres mulls it over. He's witnessed Sweat crack tough nuts before. Lay it out for me. They labor through the remaining hours of darkness in a secluded spot of the hangar. Sweat details the suction idea, points out the burn trails from the wrecks, and demos with a pail of water and a rubber membrane, showing how the void shreds the barrier. Torres buys in. We have to verify this. I need a Hellcat for a full-power snagged landing trial. That's out of the question. We can't snag a plane without clearance. Then who do we ask? The air boss? The captain? They'd dismiss us outright. I'm just a machinist mate second class, not some engineer. Sweat knows Torres sees the truth. The Navy runs on strict ranks. Concepts trickle from above, not below. An enlisted gearhead doesn't dictate fuel designs to flag officers. What if we go ahead anyway? Sweat whispers. Go ahead with what? Grab a Hellcat tonight. Fit the foam. Do a test touchdown. If it succeeds, we've got evidence. If not, I'll face the music. Torres gapes. That's flat out against the law. You'd be hijacking government property. 20 years at Leavenworth, or worse, a firing line. How many more flyers die while we chase approvals? Torres recalls Lieutenant Edwards, the 73 lost on the Independence, the enemy subs lurking for nightfall. I'll source the foam rubber, Torres decides. You prep the Hellcat. We trial at first light. On the 13th of November, 1943, Sweat and Torres hustle in the dim hours before dawn.
They pick Hellcat number 42, a backup not slated for early flights. Using foam from ship mattresses sliced into pieces and doused in flame blocker, they pad the insides of both fuel reservoirs. The job wraps in 40 minutes. No opportunity for ground checks or math. They scarcely seal the hatches before dawn patrols gear up. I'll pilot it, Torres offers. No, my brainchild, my risk. You're no flyer. I've logged 30 hours riding shotgun. I can handle a landing. Torres grasps the madness, but time's short. Keep it brief. 1 touchdown, then we escalate to the captain. Sweat settles into the controls. The DAC team readies for daybreak action. Amid the shuffle of planes, an extra Hellcat rolling to the launch spot blends in. Sweat's pulse races. He's never catapulted off a carrier, never sat down on one. He's poised for naval aviation's riskiest feat with an unapproved fuel tweak. The launch controller signals ahead. Sweat edges to the catapult. The crew links the restraint. He recalls the sequence. Flaps extended. Fuel mix rich, prop maxed, canopy secured. The catapult launches. The force pins him back. 3 seconds on, he's aloft, ascending from the Essex at 200 knots. For 10 minutes, Sweat orbits the fleet. He expends fuel, dropping tanks to half capacity, the danger zone for blasts. His grip trembles. He's racked up half a dozen punishable acts in 60 minutes. If this flops, his service ends in disgrace. He aligns for descent. The signal officer directs him. Sweat throttles back, deploys flaps, tweaks his path. The DAC looms. Wheels pound down. Hook grabs number 2 wire. Speed drops from 90 to 0 in 2 seconds. Sweat senses the fuel shift. He braces for the boom. Silence. He's unharmed. Tanks hold. The foam succeeded. Sweat rolls to parking and kills the engine. Exiting, he spots Commander David McCampbell, Air Group leader, marching over with 6 staff in tow. McCampbell's flushed with fury. What in blazes are you up to? The showdown unfolds on deck. 200 crew as audience. Sir, let me clarify. Clarify? You swiped a Navy fighter, ran an unsanctioned sortie, jeopardized the whole group. Torres intervenes. Sir, if you'd hear us out, I'll lock you both up pronto. Chaos ensues. Officers bark. Deckhands pause to gawk. Calls ring for security. Sweat attempts the foam vacuum pitch, but McCampbell brushes it off. Then Captain Ralph Waller, Essex's skipper, hits the deck. Commander McCampbell, report. Stolen plane, rogue flight, 40 regs breached. Waller faces Sweat. Why? Sweat spills it all. Suction concept, shredded seals, foam remedy, the just completed flawless test. Deck falls quiet. Waller eyes the Hellcat. You altered the fuel tanks? Yes, sir, without orders. And executed a max thrust snag with tanks at half? Yes, sir. Waller inspects the plane, summons the engineering chief. They probe the foam setup. 5 minutes pass. Waller pivots to Sweat. Machinists mate Sweat. You're headed for lockup or fleet savior. We'll see. Commander McCampbell, halt all flights. Radio the Bureau of Aeronautics. Prep 10 more Hellcats for tweaks. If tales of everyday folks reshaping history via bravery and cleverness captivate you, think about subscribing to Last Words. We deliver the hidden accounts of champions who defy the unattainable. Tap subscribe and hit the bell to catch every release. The Bureau of Aeronautics replies swiftly. Captain Ralph Waller's dispatch. Enlisted mechanic possibly cracked fuel tank blast riddle. Reaches Admiral John McCain, head of Task Force 38. McCain mandates prompt trials. On the 14th of November 1943, the USS Essex runs supervised tests. 6 Hellcats get foam-padded fuel tanks. 6 others stay stock. Each plane does 10 snagged landings across fuel volumes, entry velocities, ocean conditions. Pilots stress the boundaries: rough impacts, skewed grabs, peak slowdowns. Outcomes are definitive. No blasts in foam-equipped craft. 2 in the unmodified batch. Yet, Navy leaders stay doubtful. Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman, overseer of carrier air advancements, boards the Essex to grill Sweat personally. You're saying 50 MIT engineers overlooked what a Hoosier farm lad spotted? I'm no engineer, sir. Maybe that's the edge. I skipped formulas, eyed the ruins. Sherman reviews test stats, chats with flyers, checks foam fits. At last, he poses the core query. Operational effects? Mass, handling, upkeep? Sweat's prepped. 5 pounds a tank, barely noticeable. Flight trials show no drop-off. 45 minutes to fit, $8 in supplies. Sherman rules. Rolling this out across the fleet. Every Pacific Hellcat modified in 14 days. But supplies tight. Foam rubbers scarce, mostly for vests and floats. Sherman commandeers all fitting stock in the theater. Still short. Idea floats. Use mattresses. Ships carry hordes. Their innards, flame-treated, could serve. In 72 hours, Pacific sailors dissect bunks. They slumber on coils while foam shields aviators. No gripes. Everyone's lost kin to tank fires. The upgrade drive sets records for swiftest plane overhauls. By November's end, 1943, over 800 Hellcats boast foam-lined tanks. Admiral Mitcher ends the night ops prohibition. On the 4th of December, 1943, the initial real-world combat evaluation takes place. Task Force 38 is conducting operations close to the Gilbert Islands. Japanese spies have pinpointed the location of the carrier fleet. At 20:30 hours, radar detects approaching planes. 12 Mitsubishi G4M Betty torpedo bombers are heading in from the northwest. 4 Hellcats equipped with the new foam modifications take off to intercept during the night hours. The aviators include Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare, Lieutenant Alex Vrazzo, Ensign Warren Scone, and Ensign John Ballantyne. O'Hare guides the group through the completely dark skies. They fly without any running lights, depending solely on radar directions from the Essex. The enemy bombers skim low over the waves, attempting to evade detection. At 20:47 hours, O'Hare catches sight of the lead Betty, a shadowy form against the even darker sea. He plunges downward, firing from 300 yards. His glowing tracers trace across the bomber's body. The Betty bursts into flames and plunges into the water. Vrazzo downs the next one. Scone claims the third. Tracers and blasts light up the night. The Japanese group scatters in disarray, but O'Hare's Hellcat sustains hits. A tail gunner on one Betty lands rounds into his left wing and fuel reservoir. Fuel pours from the damaged tank. The self-sealing layer performs as intended. The flow slows and then halts. Yet O'Hare has shed 50 gallons.
He's low on fuel and turns back toward the Essex. The ship is rocking in rough waves. O'Hare approaches, battling gusts and dwindling reserves. His wheels hit hard. The hook snags the wire. The abrupt stop sends a massive jolt through his tanks, now at half capacity. Prior to Sweat's innovation, O'Hare would have perished right there. His tanks would have erupted, just like those of Lieutenant Anderson or Lieutenant Edwards. But this time, O'Hare steps out unscathed. The foam cushioned the surge. No void developed, no liner ripped, no spark flared. The battlefield outcomes prove it beyond doubt. Throughout December of 1943, carrier groups with night fighters knocked down 47 Japanese planes while suffering 0 tank blasts. By January of 1944, that tally climbs to 63 enemy aircraft eliminated. The Japanese grow wary. Intercepted papers show their bewilderment. Their reports label American night fighters as nearly impervious to battle wounds and able to maintain long missions without breakdowns.
Japanese flyers start steering clear of nighttime strikes on the carrier fleets altogether. The broader effects are profound. Freed from nighttime torpedo threats, U.S. carrier forces can push forward more boldly. They can advance close enough to strike Japanese-occupied islands. They can hold positions for extended multi-day campaigns without pulling back to safer zones at dusk. The victory ratios highlight the shift. Before the foam-lined tanks, daylight fights favored Americans at 19-1, but night activities were halted due to blast dangers. Afterward, daytime ratios hit 23-1, while nighttime soared to 31-1. Enemy casualties surge. U.S. losses drop sharply. By February of 1944, the upgrade becomes routine across all Navy carrier planes, not only Hellcats, but Corsairs, Avengers, and Helldivers as well. The foam lining approach extends to bomber reservoirs, then to cargo planes. A post-war seized German Luftwaffe report remarks on the American breakthrough. The foe has engineered a fuel tank setup that makes their planes almost resistant to blasts during carrier work. Our efforts to copy this setup have fallen short. The American edge in technology and flight safety poses a major strategic drawback for our side. In March of 1944, Lieutenant Alex Vrazo, one of the flyers from that pioneering night battle, seeks out Sweat in the Essex repair area. Vrazo has just earned ace status with 19 verified victories. "Word is, you're the one who sorted the fuel tanks," Vrazo remarks. Sweat gives a nod. "Took some rounds last week, tank pierced. Got back on vapors, hit the deck rough. Walked away fine." Vrazo holds out his hand. "Thanks to you, I'm breathing. Thanks to you, plenty of us are." Sweat grips it firmly. He's at a loss for words. "How many flyers do you figure you kept alive?" Vrazo presses. Sweat has never tallied it. He was simply resolving an issue. The tale of James Sweat shows us that breakthroughs frequently emerge from surprising sources, from individuals who view challenges in fresh ways because they're unbound by traditional approaches. If accounts like this intrigue you, tales of regular folks who altered the path of history, please give this video a like and pass it along to anyone who values true acts of valor. Your engagement allows us to keep uncovering these overlooked narratives. From November of 1943 through August of 1945, foam-lined fuel tanks averted an estimated 394 tank blasts in carrier planes. That's 394 aviators who returned home. 394 households that avoided a tragic knock on the door. 394 individuals who continued flying sorties, downing more foes, aiding more troops on the ground.
The Navy built 12,275 EF-6 Hellcats over the course of the war. Every one produced after December of 1943 featured foam-lined tanks inspired by Sweat's concept. The upgrade also rolled out to 10,000 F-4U Corsairs, 9,839 TBEF Avengers, and 7,040 SB-2C Helldivers, for a combined total of 3,973 protected aircraft. Yet James Sweat received no widespread acclaim while the war raged. The Navy kept the foam lining method secret, worried that if the Japanese grasped it, they could devise ways around it. Sweat's name is absent from formal records released before 1990. He advanced to Chief Petty Officer in January of 1944. He remained aboard the Essex through war's end, servicing planes, mentoring fresh crew, and subtly adding enhancements that preserved lives. When fellow sailors inquired about his part in the tank fix, he brushed it aside. "Plenty of folks pieced it together," he'd say.
"I just got fortunate." Once the fighting stopped, Sweat went back to Terre Haute. He launched a modest garage for car repairs. He wed his old flame from school, Mary Catherine Sullivan. They brought up 4 kids. He rarely mentioned his wartime days. His offspring learned nothing of his life-saving contributions until a naval researcher located him in 1991. The foam-lined tank method that Sweat originated remains in use now. Today's planes, both armed forces and commercial, employ foam barriers in reservoirs to block blasts in accidents. The Federal Aviation Administration requires foam-driven blast suppression in passenger jet tanks. Formula One vehicles incorporate comparable tech. Each time you settle into a commercial flight, you're safeguarded by a feature that leads straight back to a 24-year-old repairman who wouldn't stand for needless deaths. In 1993, the Navy presented Sweat with the Legion of Merit, 48 years overdue. The commendation states, "For outstandingly commendable service and accomplishments, whose breakthrough in fuel setup safety directly led to saving hundreds of lives and greatly advanced naval air efforts in the Pacific Campaign." Sweat joined the event at the Pentagon. He was 74. When journalists asked about the long-delayed honor, he replied, "I was only performing my duties. The true champions are the flyers who carried out those runs. I simply ensured they returned." James Sweat passed away in 2009 at age 90. His notice in the Terre Haute Tribune-Star noted his naval tenure in the closing lines. Most who read it never realized the unassuming repairman who'd serviced their vehicles for 50 years had rescued hundreds. The takeaway from James Sweat's journey isn't about brilliance or qualifications or advanced schooling. It's about perceiving issues sharply, summoning the bravery to step up, and recognizing that often the greatest advances arise from those not expected to hold the keys, but who insist the keys must exist. Occasionally, the one who transforms the world is the last person anyone anticipated. Occasionally, the answer is straightforward, and occasionally, bending rules is the sole path to preserving lives.